my house caught on fire, and I went downstairs and I was like, you know what, this is it. I'm quitting. Today's the day. I'm quitting. And I went up and then, worked it out with my boss. Everything was fine. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just wait a couple more weeks or months. And then my dog threw me down the steps. So,
And then we're going to talk about your quantum push. I'm going to give a quick example because I think this is a great way to jump into that. One of my favorite YouTubers, his name is Alex. He has a YouTube called Next Level Soul where he talks with a lot of quantum physicists, near-death experiences, channels, mediums, stuff like that. And his story, he talks about having a quantum push. So he worked in Hollywood as a video and like editor for the back end of movies. And then he also had a side business where he would wake up really early and go sell these fruits at this farmer's market. And he was just really busy. He wasn't really in love with what he was doing. He felt burnt out like everybody does. They no real connection to what they're doing. And he kept having like this idea, I should start this podcast that talks about these things, these events. And he kept pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off. And finally, one day, just walking down the stairs, he doesn't know how it happened, but he basically broke his leg in half. And it forced him to take 3 weeks to sit on the couch and do nothing and reflect. And it led to him, kind of tapering off both of those jobs and letting him have that time to himself to dig into that intuition, to close his eyes, to step back from that quick, fast-paced world that we live in America, where if you're not doing something, then you're lazy, you're worthless type thing. And then that was what led him to actually start his podcast, which now has over 1 million subscribers. It is now a giant voice for this information. And you, in your book, mentioned having a quantum push that pushed you into this. Can you describe what your life was like before, what job you had, the resistance you were feeling, and what made you actually transition? Because I think it's very fascinating.
yeah, that was really resonating with me. I'm like, oh, that sounds familiar. The old whisper, shout, roar, right? So,
Yes.
yeah, so it was very similar for me. I was working in tech and I had a really great job. I ran a create festival here. We worked with artists and entrepreneurs and creative technology companies, and it was such a fun job. But I still had this like calling that I knew that I had to do this intuition work, and that was really like my life's work was meant to be that. But I kept putting it off and I kept putting it off, and my husband were like, well, you know what? I think it's time for you to write your next book and do this full time. And I kept putting it off. And
Real quick,
then
why were you putting it off? Was it because I want people to relate to this? Was it financial? Was it what you thought people would think of you? What was the real reason? If you could think, why were you putting it off? Was it fear of change? What was it?
I think that's such a great question. I think for me, it was all of those things a little bit. Like, okay, am I going to be able to pay the bills? Am I really going to be able to succeed at this? Right? This is not many people are out there making a living teaching intuition. This is not like something there's a clear pathway. I'm going to have to figure this out on my own. And am I ready to work hard and be an entrepreneur as opposed to, having like a cushy salary job, right? So there was all of these things going around in my head, but I knew what I needed to do, right? And then actually, it was really interesting. I was in Bilbao, Spain, and I did the Walk of St. James. And at the end, you go up to this, it's the castle that was in Game of Thrones, and you ring this bell and you make a wish. And, I wish to, work for the spirit, for God, for the universe. And 1 week later, I was on the phone. I was in a fight with my boss, and we were on the phone, and I forgot I left a kettle on, and my house caught on fire. And I went downstairs and I was like, you know what, this is it. I'm quitting. Today's the day. I'm quitting. And I went up and then, worked it out with my boss. Everything was fine. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just wait a couple more weeks or months. And then my dog threw me down the steps. So, so then my husband had to walk down the floor. I was in a lot of pain. Like I got hurt, actually. It wasn't that funny at the time, but I was in a lot of pain. But my husband looked at me and he's like, now are you going to go quit your job and do your life's work? And I was like, yes. And as soon as I spoke it, I knew like I made it real. And then I went in and I resigned the next day and I got everything moving, and it was great. It actually worked out really well. I worked with my company on like for some, stuff on the side. I still did the festival for a while, and it all worked out. The universe had it all lined up for me, but I didn't realize it, and I was just too afraid to take that leap or respond to that push, right? So but I always say, if you don't listen to those whispers, eventually it's going to be a shout. And then finally, you're going to have to learn through the pain, which is what I did. But I'm glad that I did in the end. But it would have been nice to do it earlier, and I wouldn't have had to do that.
Right. And I think that's a big message. Joe Dispenza talks a lot about it. Us humans, we like to learn um, from something we don't prefer. And then we go, oh, yeah, I don't like that. And then I'll do something I actually prefer. Or we wait until there's a moment of death or diagnosis or pain or suffering. And then we change. Like, how bad does it have to get before we finally change? And I think the message that your book really illustrates, and that a lot of people that are doing this work, is why wait for that pain
Yes.
to change? Why not change in a state of joy and happiness and love? Um, Instead of experience what we don't want, let's just go right for what that intuition is. And I think that's what your work with Intuition Labs and what your book is like, let's start connecting to the intuition, the quantum field now, so that we can have that intuition, so we don't have to
Yes.
endure this materialistic
Yes.
push that we don't prefer to then experience what we do want to prefer. It kind of helps speed things up a little bit. And it's always in the benefit of you, your soul, that connection. Because right now, I think we have so many people that are filling that hole with substance abuse, with alcohol, with weed, with video games, with online gambling,
Mhm.
um, with other really bad habits, because they have that hole. They can't put their finger on it, so they're filling it with these distractions, these addictions. And that's why I think the work, really from a practical level of what you're doing, is so important. And I know a lot of people don't want to admit it, but they're resonating with what you're talking
Yeah.
about in your book and your Intuition Labs. And I think the more that we talk about it and share it, the more people are just going to finally have that aha moment, whether it's a quantum push of the
Yes.
universe saying wake up, or if
Yes.
they're able to intuitively understand this themselves.
Yes. I mean, you can, in this world, you can learn two ways, the easy way or the hard way. And your intuition is there to teach you to learn the easy way. It just guides you. It's effortless, and it helps you to create a life of ease, and doors naturally open and you naturally step through them because you're in tune with that flow of life instead of resisting it.
I agree. And in your book, you have a great diagram. I triple circled it. I'm probably going to make a TikTok on it. So I'm going to steal all your intellectual
I love
information.
it. Steal away.
It's a diagram, and it's so powerful. It's so simple, and it shows the local field versus the non-local field.
Mm,
And it goes from brain to tissue to molecule to cell to atom to energy to the field. And it
yes.
shows this relationship of how what we believe to be material, if you take the the building blocks all the way down, you realize it's nothingness. It's a vortex. It's like a tornado. If we see a tornado because it's sucking up all the debris, but if it wasn't having any of the dirt and the stuff, it would be invisible. And that's kind of what we are, is we're these invisible vortices of
Mm,
energy, but we pick
mm,
up these particles, these quanta, these uh electron, whatever you want to visualize it. And I think that diagram is so important because it illustrates those two worlds and how you can operate within that spectrum. And it kind of gives you the freedom to choose, hey, you know what, like your daughter, I want to live in a materialistic world because that's just what I want to. It's kind of
right.
empowering. It's not
Yes.
a religious belief where it's, if you don't do these things, you're bad, you're going to hell forever, or you're
Yes.
gonna have, it
Yes.
says, you know, these information, and you can
Mhm.
choose to live in a materialistic world if that's what's relevant for you in this experience, or you can access that intuition and this connect to this internet, this inner light, this information, which you talk about
Yes.
in your book, and operate from that. So it's really an empowering piece of information and diagram. And I wanted you to just kind of hint on that, because when I saw that, I was like, that was such a good visual for me.
Yeah, it was important for me to include that in the book because that was something that really helped me to understand that sort of really the spectrum between physicality and non-physicality, and the inner field and the outer field, because we're so programmed to look at everything in terms of duality. Oh, there's material and immaterial, and there's outside and inside, but none of that is actually opposites. I mean, the endpoints are complementary, but there's a whole spectrum in between that actually connects these things. And I love what you said about it being a choice, because I think when we look at the world as being sort of interconnected that way, it doesn't have to be, oh, well, the external world's evil and the internal world's good, because it's not like that. I think that it's all a gift. And what our intuition calls us to do is just stop overemphasizing material. That's all we're saying, is we're just taught and conditioned to just see part of the picture. And our intuition is saying, hey, there's this whole part over here. Just open it up. There's more. There's nothing wrong with this part. There's just so much more, right?
I agree. And it's one of the fascinating things where it's like, I try and tell people it's like we live more closely related to a Marvel movie or an X-Men movie than we do just this materialistic world that's devoid of meaning and all randomness. And what's fascinating is the pushback you'll get. You get people defending a life of no meaning, of pain and suffering, of eat, sleep, work, pay your taxes, and die. And they actually defend that rather than saying, hey, I'm actually telling you you're a superhero. You're
Right.
an X-Men. If you just put in the time and practice and understanding, you can have precognition, you can have an outer body experience, you can have dreams, you can have manifestations, you can have this intuition, this guide. And it's just interesting that we've come to a point in our society where people are actually defending a limited
Yes.
life.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah, I don't understand it either. And I think it's one of those things where, some people are just change resistance. And this is my comfort zone and I don't want to get out of it. And intuition, one thing intuition is going to do, it is going to call you outside your comfort zone. That is like part of its wiring. It's going to call you to do new things, try new things, explore new things, be open to change. So I guess as human beings, we are creatures of comforts to some degree, and people just like their little world and they don't want to get outside of it. So I don't know. I just think with time and with generational change, that's going to start happening less and less. I even see it in my generation. When I grew up, talking about astrology, people still looked at me sideways. Young people, I didn't have anybody to talk about astrology with when I was growing up. Now, everybody, I mean, and Snapchat, your rising signs on there. I was like, I would have died for that when I was younger. So even in that generation, already there's a shift in understanding and popularity that, that these things are normal and natural. And, I see intuition sort of going that way as well as something that we're going to look back in 50 years and be like, of course, telekinesis, we were doing that all the time. Like, yeah, this and that, telepathy, precognition, that's all stuff that is byproducts of living in a quantum world.
I completely agree. And again, and it's your message. It's not this or that. It's this and that, right? Like a
Yes.
great example is like Western medicine. There's a time and place for Western medicine. If I get shot, you bet your butt I'm gonna
Yes.
go to the emergency room and I want
Don't give me
surgery.
Reiki for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But there's also natural herbs and natural remedies and meditation and stress management and things that we can do just intuitively as ourselves that can do a lot of good for the body. So it's not this versus that. And that's the problem that we see on social media is this constant butting heads. I'm right, you're wrong. It's like it's all of it. And we need to start being open to all of it because it has its time and place for everything. And your book does a really good job of illustrating that. So I'm gonna throw some stuff at you and I just kind of want to get your ideas on this. So, um, what I like to do with a lot of the guests is talk about a polymath. A polymath is someone who kind of looks at everything going on out there, right? They're not just specialized in one little thing. Um, and so I want to get your idea because you're kind of a polymath as well. You're digging deep into all these different ideas, right? You lived in a haunted house. You're
Yes.
talking about quantum physics. You're dealing with intuition, past life regressions. You're seeing it, and these are different modalities of information, right? And I think what we're seeing is they're all kind of pointing towards the same answer, which is why it's so powerful. So we have books here. So Mindsight. This is about near-death experiences who are blind. So people that were
Mm.
born blind, die, have an out-of-body experience, see, come back, and are corroborated by what they saw. You were wearing a pink shirt, you have short hair, you have a necklace. How can they know they are blind? So to me, that's the number one smoking gun. If you have an out-of-body experience as a blind person, that shows it that there's more than the material life. We are more than our physical bodies. Proof of Heaven. Uh,
Great book.
yeah,
Love that
Eben
book.
Alexander,
Yep.
neuroscientist, Harvard, was an atheist and now is as a neuroscientist, someone who knows the brain very well, is outwardly speaking that we are more than our physical body. Okay,
Yes.
Return of Life by Jim Tucker. This guy is a professor at the University of Virginia, has done over thousands of past children that are from 4 years old to 7 years old who talk about a past life and get all the information right. Netflix has a great documentary of this. These are children. They don't have a dog in the fight. They don't have any
Yep.
dogma. They're not trying to
Yes.
make money. They're speaking from the heart. Okay. We have Dolores Cannon and Brian Weiss, who are past life regressionists. Brian had a segment on Oprah for many years where he would past life regress people and they would have this past life regression and then they could see that there was a life in between lives in the spiritual realm. Okay, you have books like the In Between, Hadley, who's a hospice nurse. if you talk to hospice nurses, first of all, that's probably not a good thing. It's probably because you're losing a loved one, which is very sad. But hospice nurses have so many stories
Mm.
of dying patients talking to dead relatives, to having shared death experiences, to having moments where they go, oh my gosh, this is not the end. Um, Listening to ayahuasca, people who take psychedelics, a whole
Mm.
nother modality where they have the
Mm.
exact same experiences as near-death experiencers. Sacred geometry of the torus field, the Fibonacci sequence. We see this throughout nature, as above, so below, from everything from our DNA helix all the way to hurricane systems. I'm almost done. Cell biology, Bruce Lipton, experimenting with stem cells, can show that stem cells are reading the environment of the invisible rainbow, outside of physical properties. And then a book I just finished, which I highly recommend everybody reading, is The Flip, where a professor talks about some of the smartest minds in the world, Galileo, Einstein, how they spent the majority of their time focusing on metaphysics and
Mm.
precognition and
Mm.
intuition. In
Mm.
fact, my favorite example is Curie, the Nobel Prize winner, who's the first female to win the Nobel Prize, who also won it in two separate categories, who was constantly seen getting her information from psychics and mediums. So the point I'm making is you have all these experts like yourself, and we'll throw your book in there as well by Kim Chestney, The Illumination Code with Quantum Physics and Understanding of Intuition. All these experts, different backgrounds, 10 years plus in a different modality of information, and yet their conclusion is all the same, which is around the idea that we are more than our physical bodies, and we are having a physical experience to learn different things, learn lessons. What comes off the top of your head when I go through all those things?
Yeah, I mean, what I was thinking as I was seeing all that is that if you really want to look for evidence, there's so much evidence. There's evidence all around us with people who have written these books, their shared accounts. There's evidence in your personal life if you look close enough. And I'm so glad that we're finally taking stock of this evidence and starting to take it personally, because it's something that seeing is believing, we always say, right? Seeing is believing, but in reality, like, that's not true at all. Right? And it even goes beyond sort of the near death experience, like, say, even an astral projection. If you've astral projected, well, you know one thing, and this is a really important takeaway, right? Is that your consciousness does not live in your brain, right? Because you're thinking there and your body's over here and you're still thinking. So that is a huge revelation, right? And the same kind of thing happens in out of body experience. We realize that we're still alive if we're not in our bodies, and that is like the biggest clue, and it's been going on throughout history. To ancient times, people have been talking about these things, sharing these stories. We know that this is a real phenomenon, and now let's just look at that. Let's look at it with open eyes and through a scientific lens, and recognize that, hey, this is what we are. We are capable of this. That's great. That's not something to sweep under the rug. That's amazing. It's a superpower. Let's figure out how to use it and get more of it. That's what I'm trying to do.
Absolutely, and it's called the hard problem of consciousness. Eben Alexander talks about it a lot, how still right now in 2024, you can Google this, we still do not have the first sentence to describe how the brain creates consciousness from a materialistic standpoint. But again, the gaslighting continues to say, well, we will figure it out.
Yeah.
So we're going to maintain a Newtonian physics world of Darwinian dogma of survival of the fittest, me versus you, because in the future we know that we will find where consciousness is made. And the evidence, I try to tell people, the evidence is so overwhelming now that consciousness, like you said, is not stored in the brain. It is this infinite connected field that
We're
you
made
talk
of
so
it.
much about.
The whole world is consciousness. That's the thing. Everything we see is consciousness, right? We've realized that, through the work of Irvin Laszlo, understanding when you break everything down, the molecules and the atoms and the particles, and it turns into information. We live in a world that's running on information. And what processes information? Mind, consciousness. So it's gonna go. Like, that mindset, that old paradigm is gonna go. It's just a matter of how long they're gonna be able to hold on to it and keep brainwashing kids to think that way as they grow up in school.
Agreed. And It's really sad to see because again, it makes you a limited being that's fearful, that's feels like they need to listen to some knowledge police or some person above
Yes.
them from what's what right or wrong. And it's the most freeing, empowering thing to know that, oh, this is we have access to all this information, that I'm not just this physical body, that I continue, that I have always existed. Once you exist, you can never not exist.
Right.
And I just think that books like the one that you're writing and that you have written and the work you're doing at Intuition Lab is so important, especially for a younger generation, so that we can break free of this paradigm that we are just these random physical beings that are just lucky to be alive and just
Yes.
do as you're told, right?
Just go around and consume as much as you can because you've got to save up and preserve yourself, which is totally outdated thinking. And also the idea that we don't have to be afraid of death anymore, right? Because as a kid, you're like, oh, you're going to die someday and then you're gone forever. Well, no, that's not reality either. Death is a transformation and there's a new adventure that waits on the other side. So maybe we can live our lives fully instead of trying to just hoard as much as we can and not die, you know?
Yeah, I think and that's the number one thing you hear from near-death experiencers by far is how they no longer fear death. And I think that's the biggest point that can shift a lot of things is everybody in a materialistic viewpoint is terrified of death. And so that's why they do their rules. That's why they listen to instructions. That's why they do this entire thing is they're terrified of death. But when you understand these pieces of information that you're trying to share people in your books is once you don't have the fear of death and you know that life continues on, it opens up a whole new tool belt and toolbox of things that you can do and think and go and become and the intuition that you can allow yourself to have access to.
Yes.
I mean, it's just so fascinating. Okay, here we go. So why why is developing your quantum intelligence so important for humanity and our future? And what do you hope readers take away from your book?
Well, the first part of that question, I'll answer first, is that the key thing I would love for people to take away from this book is reconnection to really the magic and wonder of life. It's so easy to just not see it. There's so much around us. There's so much beauty and magic and serendipity and connection around us. And that's again part of our mental health is we don't see that. We get in ruts. We get down. Everything just feels like lame and boring. But when you turn into your intuition, all of this magic comes alive and you realize you're participating in something real and bigger than you. And then suddenly there's this whole bigger connection out there that really can vitalize you and drive you and inspire you to do what you're meant to do in the world, right? Because we all come in with our own unique set of talents and abilities, and our intuition will guide us to what we can do to help other people and to help make this world a better place. So I think that's what shifts to, ultimately the bigger role of intuition. It's so funny. I put in my bio that intuition is the driving force in the future of humanity. And people like laugh about that. They're like, well, that's a pretty big claim. I'm like, you'll see by the end of the workshop why I'm right. Because it's true. It's true. It is in the underpinning. It's our ability to tune into that information, that wisdom, whatever word you want to call that sort of guiding all knowingness that we can tap into from the inside. That is what builds the future. That's why people like Einstein, Steve Jobs, huge advocates of intuition. Tesla, you have scientists, people who are ingenious, right? They know intuition is our genius. So whether we're talking about really developing this world, creating a better world, or we're talking about unity, empathy between people coming together, we live in a world that's so divisive that we're turned against each other. Everybody, it's us against them. But no, intuition shows us the commonality. So getting back to that whole sort of unified perspective and that creative flow, that inspiration that comes through intuition, these are keys. And I learned this from working in the tech industry. That these are really powerful keys that are making real transformation in the world right now and will continue to do so. Even with artificial intelligence, don't even get me started on all that, right? And quantum computing, like intuition has a role in that. And I'm really excited to see, what's going to happen with all that too.
I agree. We are going down a interesting route now that we're trying to create these, you know, algorithmic learning AI robots that even now we're hearing stories that they're having their own language, they're having their own form of communication that we can't even identify that's going far surpast what we thought we were doing. We're basically building Skynet from Terminator. Um, so there's never been a time to be connected internally from our internal web. And I've always argued like we need a great simplification. We need
Mm.
to disconnect from this world of distractions and technology, as great as it is, but foster the inner connection, the inner knowledge, the inner knowingness, the connection to nature itself. If we really want to progress as a human species and have a better life, like what do you think about that?
Yeah, we have to live in harmony with the world we're in. That's the thing. We don't want to sort of say, "Oh, this is like bad, so we're gonna just put this aside." And I think part of this whole thing with what's happening with artificial intelligence, and I actually had a really interesting conversation with Jesse Shell. He wrote a book called The Art of the Game, and he talked about, are we living in a simulation? And I asked him, I said, do you think computers have intuition, or like what are computers going to be able to get intuition? Because in my mind, that was the real question. For me, the defining factor of artificial intelligence is if they have intuition, right? So they can take algorithms and put things together and mix it up through advanced calculations, but do they have intuition? Can they create something new, right? So that's really the defining factor with our intuition. It makes something new and different, and something that helps us to evolve and change, right? And his answer floored me. He's like, I think machines are nothing but intuition. And I was like, wow. I was like, so that's a little bit of a different perspective that really is something for us to unpack. So really kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think the answer right now, it's an unknown, and I'm not going to pretend to know the full extent of that. But I think that we are going to approach this sort of singularity where we have to ask ourselves, like, what is life? And I think the answer to that is very deeply connected to something intuitive.
I agree. I agree. I'm just thinking, you do these intuition labs. What's like a story that stands out to you that was really, I guess, mind blowing, or for someone that has a materialistic perspective and they hear this story that you from whether it was something that happened in your lab or you heard from, maybe it was a near death experience, a past life regression, or something that stands out to you, if any.
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I think that the greatest gift that happens in this is really the sort of communal synchronicities that happen, where again and again we'll have people say the same thing when they're not in the same time in the same place. A really cool, just little things that happen to kind of show you the power of the quantum field is I do every year I do a token gift meditation with students, and we go. It's sort of like the beginning of like an intuitive journey, and they meet a guiding force, and the guiding force gives them a gift. Well, I keep track of the gifts from year to year, and for the last 3 years running, and okay, just to be clear, the students intuitively pick their own gifts. So I would say, Dylan, your guiding force is standing there with a box. Open the box. What's inside? And you would go and pick this item up and tell me what it is. Well, the last 3 years in a row, the first people have picked a golden key, like a very specific golden key. 3 years. How does that happen? I just did the event. I did this publicly, an event right after the book came out, and half of the people, I swear, in the audience got a golden key as their first one, right? And so you think, okay, so maybe there's something archetypal about a golden key that people just naturally pick it first. Well, then you go a little further, and the last 2 years, the second one people picked was a prism or a rainbow. And it went all the way down to the third one. The first three were the same for 2 years in a row. And they were just random things. I can't remember what the third one was, but it was just like some random object. So it's synchronicities like this. I know it's not like some mind-blowing thing like a near-death experience, but when you bring a group together and you have a collective experience like this, and we have students from year to year who are like, can witness it. I'm not there. They're like, oh yeah, I picked that key last year. And this is like, I picked that 2 years ago, and they never talked about it or anything. So you just can't deny it anymore, that there's this sort of invisible connective force between us that sort of we can tap into. And so that's really exciting. And I think it helps people really to start to trust themselves and know that there's something going on inside there that's not just, something I'm making up, because it feels like imagination sometimes when you're using your intuition, but
Yeah.
imagination is a gateway.
They've never heard of other people what they pick, and they go out of the ether. They just go golden key, and they have no idea that someone else has ever said that. And you're just
Nope.
like sitting there in your mind. You're like,
I'm going crazy. I'm like,
Yeah.
shut up. Are you
Of the
serious?
yeah, of the infinite things they could want, right? A new job, a new love in their life, a dog, all the money in the world, a boat. They say a golden key.
Well, it's any object. So you'll pick up a box and it could be any objects in the universe. It could be a dog in there. It could be a heart. It could be a snake. It could be anything. Of all the objects in all of the existence of reality, they all pick a golden key. Figure that. I mean, it's just like, it's just, you can't make this stuff up. And then just having other people witness it together is so powerful. So we start with little things like that. And then we go into illumination journeys and past life stuff. And you start getting validations with different people talking about different themes in a past life that you're still working with today. So it becomes really personal and transformation when you start witnessing these synchronicities happening and getting validations from other people. Or like we'll work with our insight cards, and like you'll have four people pull the same exact card at home, and you know what I mean. So it's like, how does this happen, right? It's so cool.
And I think we should touch on that because that's a huge trend going on social media right now. Right now is creators that are going to pull a tarot card and say, if this is on your page, this is for you. There's no hashtags. There's no anything, this is on your for you page. You don't even follow me. And they read a tarot card, or they read an insight card. My fiance does it all the time, and I'll watch it and I'll be like, well, that kind of sums up what's going on in your life right now. That's pretty close. What do you think is going on there in that realm? Because it's starting, especially with the younger generation, this is something that's getting a lot of traction, for good reason too, I think.
Yeah. So, and I actually did something. I just set up a TikTok like a couple weeks ago for this purpose because I love this idea of putting out these insight cards. And my insight cards are like different than tarot cards because tarot cards can kind of like have a set message, right? So with an insight card, you pull it up and your intuition reads it the way that you're meant to read it. So having this sort of just show up in your feed and having this symbolism speak to you through this art of sacred seeing. Have you heard of sacred seeing? You might have if you read the book a little bit, but
Yeah.
I'll tell folks
Explain
about
for
it.
people what that is.
I love it because it comes from like ancient Catholic traditions and Christianity. So this mystical act of looking at images and having the divine speak to you through images, which is exactly what tarot and all of this stuff is the same thing. Meanwhile, that's all poo-pooed. That's like satanic and the devil, but it's okay if you do it, if you just look at a picture that was made by an artist who was thinking spiritual thoughts at the time, right? So it just goes to show it doesn't really matter. It's this process of your intuition is symbolic. So whether you're looking at a tarot card or an oracle card or an insight card, it uses that symbolism to give you the message that you need at that moment. So that's how it can be really powerful. And then, and in case you look at those and you think, well, I'm just making it up, I'm just applying that to my life. When you use those cards with other people and you actually start talking to them about things in their life that you have no way of knowing about, you realize, oh, wait, the magic is happening. Like this is all magic. It feels like imagination because that's just how intuition feels when it comes through sometimes. But it's magic. And I love cards. I think cards are a great way to play with your intuition and build trust in it.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to just what happens when you're in an environment for so many generations that teaches materialism as the only way, is you start lying to yourself and saying, no, it's just my imagination, or I just wanted that to happen, so of course I made that up,
Right.
as opposed to
Inner
being like,
critic.
what are the odds I'm in this moment at this time in my life? I see this card, that's the first thing that pops into my head. It's not just this you hoping for something and it's a sad thing where you're just like, well, that's just because I wanted a new boyfriend
Yeah.
and that's why that happened. It's like, no, this means you're on the right track. These are breadcrumbs from the field, from the quantum understanding. And it's that idea of when you start practicing it, just like any muscle, just like any new hobby or new talent, you're going to start picking up on it, starting to get stronger. You're going to start seeing more things. You're going to start noticing 1111 on your
Yes.
on your clock. You're going to start seeing these little synchronicities that help guide you. And as you allow those to help guiding you, you can be the new creator of Intuition Labs, and an author, and start helping people. Because at the end of the day, the biggest thing that can help fill that hole that we all feel, because apparently we're all lonely, is giving and helping others. And a lot of what you learn in all of this work and from near-death experiences and past life regression is when you help others, you help yourself. Like it's one of the most fulfilling forms of purpose and happiness. I mean, how many times do we have to see a millionaire make a video or I achieved everything I ever wanted, I bought everything I ever wanted, and I'm still sad,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So it's really fascinating stuff. I think your book is a must read. If you haven't gotten it, The Illumination Code, The Seven Keys to Unlock Your Quantum Intelligence. Kim, thank you so much. I absolutely cannot stress enough the practical experiments that are put at the end of this book that you can practice at home in a quiet space that will actually help you dip your toes into the water of the quantum of this new science that is, won a Nobel Prize in 2022 that's now really coming to the forefront that can really help put the reins of your life back in your hands and control. And with that said, Kim, is there anything, the last thing you would want to share with the audience, maybe a younger generation as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I would just say, trust yourself, trust your intuition. It is going to be your best friend. No one will support you more than your intuition, not your partner, not your family. At the end of the day, your intuition wants what's best for you. And if you learn to trust yourself and live your life by trusting that self, you'll be more authentic. You'll find your path and purpose. You will make changes with ease. It really is the secret to having a happy life, a productive life, a life where you can give back and really participate in the expansion of this beautiful world.
Fantastic. Those are great words to leave by. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like that, please subscribe and stay tuned. We're going to have a lot more content on metaphysics, the quantum field, and the understanding that our physical reality is secondary to what consciousness is. Consciousness is fundamental, and we live more closely in a Marvel movie than we have been led to believe. Thanks.